Good morning, everyone. Good 11:30, I guess. Still morning? I am happy to have you all here in the room, and Miss Althea is on Zoom with us. And welcome you all to Credo at UUCC. I am Paula Gribble, Director of Lifespan Religious Education, pronouns she, her. And I will be supporting Credo now through adult religious education and spiritual development. That's a mouthful, just adultery. This morning we have tech support from Paul Turner. Thank you so much, Paul. When we get to the questions portion, people who are on Zoom can put their questions in the chat, and we will make sure that we do that. I want to say now, and I'll say at the end again, there is no Credo presentation in December. We'll come back in January. That person is to be announced. And if people, so I'm going to start a new nomination process. So I'm going to put a form together that'll go out through Current. So if you've met someone, talked with someone, and you just think they'd be really fascinating to hear in a Credo presentation, you're welcome to nominate them. Or you may nominate yourself if you are fascinating, interesting, and would like to share, because all UUs are usually. So we would love to hear from you in that nomination process. We would now like to welcome our presenter, Chip Dickerson. Chip considers himself a bit of an oddity, as his biggest concern on joining was that his parents would be disappointed that he was joining a church or a religious community. He was raised atheist and remains an atheist, but has an abiding interest in belief and religious community. Chip will discuss his ongoing journey in the strange new world of religion. Chip has been a member here for almost 5 years, has served on the community building team, and currently chairs the finance committee. His wife, Erin, is also a member, and his daughter, Audrey, 6 years old, can be seen in CYRE, or as he says, I didn't say this, occasionally tearing through Freeman Hall after service. I've not seen it, so. So please, let's welcome Chip Dickerson.
Oh, thanks, guys. I'm Chip Dickerson. You may also notice Audrey rolling on the floor in the sanctuary sometimes. She really loves going downhill on the bit. This is being preserved for posterity, so I will use it to embarrass her later. So, as you just heard, right? I did not grow up religious. Religion in my household was the University of Georgia football team. So right, that was sort of our version of a Sabbath, right? We'd all get together, and when I was younger, right, watch them lose. They don't do that anymore, it turns out, which has been lovely for my dad. My dad was an outspoken atheist. One of the, y'all remember the 2000s Bush era, when sort of atheism went, I don't want to like, it got trendy for a bit, maybe is the way to put it, right? You had sort of like the Richard Dawkins, like new atheist people. And like, oh man, my dad went like all in for that kind of stuff, right? He was the kind of kid so he grew up in rural Georgia. I mean, now a suburb of Atlanta, but then it was rural Georgia. And he would get sent to the office to like deliver some announcements so that the teacher could sneak in some school prayer without him complaining. Right? He was that kid. And he took to atheism with the zeal of the converted, which is particularly funny, I think. And you probably know some people, we're in UU community, who took to atheism with the zeal of the converted. Right, as a second generation atheist, I like to think that I'm much like a first generation atheist, but like not as much of a jerk about it. But like, that hasn't always actually been true, right? I don't know that that's fair. I think I became sort of aware of. I mean, I was always aware that religion existed. I wasn't that sheltered, but it wasn't really until the 2000 election, right? The Bush election, that I really started having a strong perception of religion. And it was, pretty negative. I guess because a lot of people of that era, right? I had a feeling of, when I thought about religion, right, I thought about sort of religious right that was focused on, seemed like more on intolerance than on sort of any of what's, what people would describe as the Christian virtues. And I got a little bit aggressive, and I was a little bit of a jerk. And then I was about to go to college, right? About to start my freshman year. And my college roommate was also in Chicago. And so they set up like a thing where you could meet the, other Chicago people who were going out to my school. And so I sat down. We were at one of the Chicago deep dish pizza restaurants, right? So we're sitting there, we're eating pizza. And I meet my roommate, I say hi, I'm like, oh, I'm sure we'll get along great as long as you're not one of those religious nuts. And that's when I learned that my roommate was planning to enter the Catholic priesthood. We actually got along great. It turned well, okay, got along okay. Let's not go too far. We did our best to annoy each other, right? I definitely took some cheap shots about the church that I maybe regret now. He liked to get up early, and I was a late sleeper, and he decided to set his alarm to religious music every morning. Not like the good religious music, right? I can appreciate some Bach. This was like just the religious Christmas carols every day for 2 years. It was fine. It was fine. We got through it. We actually wound up being roommates for 2 years and then sharing an apartment for a year in college. And I actually even went to church with him a couple of times just to sort of see what he saw in this, experience. And I admit I still didn't quite get it. But we don't agree on probably anything still, but at least we learned to sort of get along. I'd like to think that if he knew that I was a UU now, he would think it was like a small step forward, but maybe not. It might be worse. So after this, I went to law school. I met my wife Erin there, yay, and I struggled a lot with the law on religion, right? I find the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause jurisprudence to be awful, right? I just really disagree with it, right? As somebody who is a sort of separation of church and state proponent. Actually, I signed up for Common Law 3, which at Chicago was the religion common law class, and I made it one day before I was like, yeah, no, I'm just gonna be mad for a semester. I cannot do it. This is it. And I went and took some normal class like contracts or something. But after law school, I joined a faceless mega law firm. I represented upstanding clients like cigarette companies and mortgage banks after 2008. A chemical company that wrote a memo that said the liability for this toxic chemical will cease in 2030, by which they meant that everyone exposed would be dead. Right? Those are the kinds of people. It's a little rough on your feelings of conscience, right? When you're representing people who may not be, great, but they pay their bills, so that counts. A side note, and I have to have this in my head, so now you all do too. I learned as a lawyer, right, important law facts that if you want to purchase mechanically deboned meat, like you're making pet food or something, you can order it by the bushel, the barrel, or the tanker truck. Have that image in your mind. I did manage to do sort of like one unequivocally good thing working at a law firm, maybe a couple, but this is the one that matters, right? I got to go and I was a litigator, right? So I would go to court, and I got to go up against a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. I don't know if y'all are aware. It's one of the big sort of like religious right legal groups. At the time, their cause was sort of like resisting the forward motion of the gay marriage or same-sex marriage movement, right? And I managed to convince some people to let me work with the ACLU to challenge the ban in Wisconsin on same-sex marriage. And it was fun. I really enjoyed the work, right? I still have like great memories of like it's a Sunday afternoon, I'm sitting in my local bar, just like going through like a stack of cases this high, trying to make sure we've got all of the best, law from the various courts that we're considering at the time. And I'm still tickled by a particular argument that the Alliance Defending Freedom like to make. And their argument was, we're not saying that same-sex marriage is just wrong because marriage is between a man and a woman. We're just saying that it's wrong because it disturbs traditional norms of gender complementarity, which I am confident means the same thing. And that was sort of just a fun experience to litigate against them. And it was great. I got to work with a bunch of other lawyers in my firm, sort of take the lead on some of this stuff. We won in the district court, we won in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, and we actually went up to the Supreme Court. We got appealed by the state of Wisconsin just before Obergefell went through. But because we were on the gay marriage is okay side, like all of the other circuits at that time, right? The court didn't take it up. It wasn't until the Sixth Circuit went against gay marriage in Obergefell that they took it. And we did write a brief for that, but we weren't lead. It's not as fun. That being said, I was really excited that I had actually gotten something good done with my life in that respect. The next thing in my life after that of significance, right, was having Audrey, my daughter, in 2017, and she quickly changed sort of all of my priorities. Instead of working, 6 days a week and not coming home for dinner, I was like, no, I've got to change my life, and I wound up moving here to Charlotte. And I first came to the UUCC. It must have been the end of 2018. I think that's how time works. We were looking for a community that shared our values, right? We're liberal, we're social justice oriented, and we like to listen to NPR. And we figured that this group probably shared all of those characteristics. We met Eve, one of our former ministers, and she's, as you all, most of you know, maybe all of you know, she was like the most welcoming and kind person in the world. She got us to, we met her, we started showing up, we started coming regularly, and then we joined shortly after. And I was still pretty clueless about religion. And I have to say, the concept of pledging was a bit of a culture shock. We got over it. We do pledge. Now I'm on the finance committee, so I'm glad we do, because I see the numbers. You all should pledge too. If you stewardship has some words for you. But the hardest thing about becoming a UU, maybe two things, but the hardest thing was coming out to my parents, right? That I was now a member of at the time, a church, now a community. And, I think my dad still thinks I'm crazy, but they've been very nice about it, right? And since I'm still an atheist, right, there's so far one can go. But so the reason why I'm still here, right? Why I show up, right? I mean, the community is lovely, right? And I do enjoy being around so many NPR listeners, but I also find the 7 principles are something that is worth thinking about. And honestly, for me, I get to the first and I'm just like, okay, this is a lot, right? The inherent worth and dignity of every person is a big commitment to make, right? It can be challenging, right? Like the person that I cut off in traffic or that cut me off in traffic has worth and dignity, right? Like Rush Limbaugh has worth and dignity. And like that, so it can be hard to live up to that, right? That challenge is one that I think is important, right? And while I have trouble with the idea of faith, I do find the beginning of our mission statement to really resonate with me, right? Challenged by our liberating faith, right? The idea of being challenged to be better rather than being sort of comfortable as we are is, I think, a really good one. It's very easy to sort of, for lack of a better word, get a little bit smug, right? Oh, I know what's best, right? I'm an atheist. I'm in favor of social justice. Look at me, right? It's important to challenge that level of comfort. And so I think what I'm trying to say is I'm looking forward to partnering with all of you in the work of justice. Thanks.
So much. I'd like to open it up to questions. Those people who are on Zoom have not had any questions, but if you do, please type them into the chat and we'll work them out. Who has a question for Jen?
Okay, first of all, have you found your former roommate and touched base with him at all these years?
It's been a while since we last talked. I think we sent a LinkedIn message to each other, which is like the sad millennial social network now. He is a priest. He did join the priesthood. He teaches in Chicago at one of the Catholic schools in Chicago, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but has a good reputation. I'd like to think that he has mellowed in his older age, but I somewhat doubt it. I'm sorry, was there a second? There was a second part.
And the second part is obviously with your law skills and wanting to do social justice. Are you working with any of the groups here and helping to understand the systemic laws and try to change them?
So as much as I should be,
I don't know if that's the right word, but you get my idea.
I haven't recently. And I think some of that was the pandemic sort of disconnecting me from the organization. And some of that is the fact that while I've done some social justice work, mostly I can be helpful from a legal context if you are a bank with like at least $100 billion in assets. Otherwise, my knowledge is a little bit more limited. That being said, I'm looking forward to getting involved again.
Let's go, John.
Curious, through your atheist journey, if you ever looked at humanism and read like the Humanist Manifesto, formed any opinions about organizing around not believing in God, or if you keep atheism as a different identity than.
Yeah, so I have thought about it, right? I ultimately don't try to organize around atheism as a principle. I think sometimes people find it a little bit off-putting, and it can be hard to work with people who that can be a big sticking point for people who would otherwise be good allies, right? I think that sort of the fundamental sort of crux of humanism is pretty consistent with both sort of the first principle and the UU principles, as well as just generally, right? I tend to believe that people are not inherently evil, right? People are not sort of sinful by nature. And so I think humanism appeals in that respect.
Right.
You had mentioned your dad, you're coming out to your dad. Do you have siblings? Are they also atheists? And then also about your spouse?
So my brother is an atheist and is outspoken and also thinks I'm weird. He actually was the first person in my family exposed to Unitarian Universalism. He had a friend who brought him to, he was a sleepover one Saturday, and on Sunday they all went to the UU in Chicago together. And all I remember is him saying something about, the open mind and the open heart, and sort of like giggling about it a little bit, right? As if anyone who will not, there's an age where being earnest is not cool. But yeah, in terms of, I don't want to speak completely for Erin's spiritual journey, but she definitely was aware that I was an atheist. I know she is not religious, and I think she is also an atheist, but I don't know that I'd push it. And then we'll see what happens with Audrey. We didn't sign her up as a Unitarian when we signed up, right? We decided she needed to make her own choices when she was able. But I am looking forward to sending her to CYRE and to OWL, because I do not trust the state of North Carolina to educate my child about sex.
Yeah, my question was about your daughter. Like, what message, like, are you teaching her? Like, what's the theme, I guess, for you as far as atheism or belief systems? Or
I mean, ultimately, right, I want her to come to her own sort of conclusions, and I don't want to push her too hard. She doesn't need to believe the same things I believe. I sort of, hope she will, but like that's sort of up to her. I think the basic principle that I would like her to appreciate, the sort of junior version of the first principle, maybe, which is just like be kind to other people, right? And right now it's more be aware that other people exist around you and maybe don't kick them by accident. But like, we're working towards, sort of, an ethic of inherent worth and dignity for her.
I understand your position regarding atheism when it pertains to religion, Christianity, the Bible stories that we all heard growing up, etc. But what's the position of atheists regarding the possibility of an ultimate creative force in the universe?
Well, I don't want to speak for the entire world. I am but one. I don't see evidence of like overall creative force, right? But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? As they say. So I am open to the possibility that is true, right? But I don't see it, right? So, and again, I think it's important, right? Like being an atheist isn't about being a dick. Sorry, right? Like people can really be jerks about it. And I think it is wrong-headed, right? There are people who are both religious and deeply intolerant, right? But like, I'd like to think that's not the majority of people, right? And not the majority of religious people, right? Most people want to, do good in the world, I think. And so a lot of being, in my mind, sort of being an atheist is about figuring out sort of how to work with people where we have sort of what is a fundamental philosophical disagreement, right? But ultimately, and frequently the same aims, right? So.
Well, I salute your discussion of atheism. My question is, by one of your remarks, you might have some influence in finance and banking. Is that correct?
I mean, influence might be overstating. I'm a cog in a large bank machine.
Well, I would encourage you and your coworkers to think about moving away from financing fossil fuel.
And so that is for the institution in which I work, which I will not name because I do not want to get in trouble, very deeply complicated, right? Like as a bank, we do the bank I work for does fund a lot of fossil fuel, right? And I wish that they would do less of it personally, right? I think that in my mind, and speaking again only for myself, one of the really positive things that is happening in the sort of bank space, and sorry, this is going to get real nerdy, so stop me if I'm going on too long. But our regulators have taken a much more sort of active focus on climate and sort of pricing in the risk of climate change to our business and to our loans. And I think that is that this is not like the solution to all problems by any means, but it is actually a really big step in terms of thinking about sort of how to do what I think of as more ethical finance, right? And that's been something that's been really interesting to see grow and develop. I think also there's an SEC rule, sorry, you can stop me, it's gonna get real dirty, SEC rule about financed emissions that is working its way through coming up. I think that's gonna have really interesting effects when you have to disclose in your K's and Q's, right, your public filings, how much emissions you finance, right? They're your type 3 emissions. I think it's gonna have a really big impact on the way that banks operate. So yeah. I'm trying to fight the good fight.
Michael, Amy?
Yeah, I think I have this as a holdover from working with the youth and coming of age and their credos. And so I'm wondering if I'm willing to go from the head of believing and not believing, which we heard a lot about, and the thinking around it, and to the credo as defined as to what do you give him heart and what that means to you.
So I think that is, I think that's a good question, right? In my mind, what I give my heart to. I don't want to be like, this is gonna sound really obnoxious. It's like the betterment of humanity as a whole, right? I mean, I believe in the. Perfectibility might be too strong a word, but we'll use it. The perfectibility of people, right? That we can make a place where people are sort of feel accepted, feel like they are, members of the community. And a lot of my sort of social justice related work has been around that, right? Has been around trying to take our sort of legal principles and make them more inclusive, right? So if there's anything that my heart goes to, other than my 6-year-old and my wife, it would be that.
Thank you.
Is there anything on Zoom? All right, any other questions here in the room?
This was great. Thank you so much for sharing and the deep thought that you've given to this subject and how you handle it. I appreciate it.
I'm appreciative and in high respect for your ability to say, here's where I'm at, but it might not be the only place to be, and maybe there's a broader way to look at it. And even if I don't find a broader way to look at it, being a part of people who do have a broader way of looking at it is not a bad thing. I'll make a small pitch for a class that's coming up. I'm trying to figure out when to hold it. But it is on religious language. It's a class that I teach called What About All These Words? And we talk about prayer and faith and religion and atheism and all kinds of stuff. And so it's a good place to go to sort of start thinking about, because a lot of times what happens is we either use or don't use the language because of some light understanding. So I hope that you join it.
Yeah, it looks like that.
Yeah.
One of my formative experiences here was taking like the fundamental or foundations of the 7 principles or something along those lines that I think Eve did. And back when we could meet in person, so it had to be 2019.
In the before times.
And that was just sort of fascinating and got me to sort of think about the underlying sort of, I don't want to say tenets of Unitarian Universalism, because we don't have those, but the principles, right, to which we are agreeing to abide by being here.
I also hold very closely the thing you said was that you went to look at your principles, and instead of just skimming them all, you were like, I got to the first one and realized that there's some work to be done. Right? I appreciate the notion that there's work to be done there, right? Well, may we show our appreciation for the kids?